Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, I'm wearing my Penn State whiteout shirt right now as a memory of what was an incredible whiteout experience that I had when Auburn went up to Penn State to play in the annual whiteout game 2 years ago. It was a game that came right down to the finish. Really excellent football game that saw Penn State get it done at the end. And then to compare and contrast to what was just a trash whiteout game this year. They played an Iowa team that has an absolutely awful, eye-bleeding offense. And Penn State, who's got a great football team this year, beat them 31-0. And Joe, the whiteout is such an excellent tradition that it deserved for them to play a good team and one that would yield a competitive game. So I hate for all the 110,000 plus Nittany Lion fans that went to that game and got to see, frankly, substandard football, especially on the part of Iowa's offense.
Yeah, based on how the matchup played out, when you compare and contrast it to all of the other fascinating games that were played over last weekend, I really think that it didn't do justice to the atmosphere because a lot of people, I think, around the country did not want to tune into that game as much as they would have otherwise. And then to your point, it wasn't the same experience for the home team.
I mean, Joe, if you want to look at the billing of that game, I mean, I don't even know how far down the line it goes. Obviously, Ohio State Notre Dame was the showstopper. I would probably put, I'm talking about pregame thought process. Probably Oregon and Colorado at number two, then Alabama at Ole Miss, and I mean, I'm keeping going down the line. I think LSU and Arkansas, Utah and Utah and Utah and
UCLA.
UCLA. I mean, maybe that's Iowa and maybe Iowa and Penn State would be the next one after. No, I would still say Oregon State and Washington State even falls above it. So, I mean, we're looking at maybe the seventh biggest game of the day, and that's the one they have for their whiteout. I mean, I don't have Penn State's schedule pulled up in front of me, but traditionally the whiteout game is their biggest home game of the year. I mean, that must mean they just have a trash home schedule this year.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that the whiteout game that they was selected would have been maybe the best game or the second best game on that weekend slate. Yeah, and so for it to rank that low on the totem pole, that definitely is saying something.
Well, I mean, last time when I went to that Auburn Penn State game, that was college game day. It was the biggest game of the day. And like I said, this one, I mean, it ranks somewhere between 7 to 10 of the biggest games of the day. Oh, Florida
It's
State
like
Clemson, definitely bigger also.
college lame day instead of college game day.
College Lame Day, that's right. They sent the ESPN 8, the Ocho analysts out there to talk about it.
Yep, that's it.
Um, Joe, speaking of Lame Day, well, let's first talk about Notre Dame's defensive game plan at the end. I mean, talk about just jaw dropping, heart wrenching loss if you're a fan of the Fighting Irish. I mean, everything lined up for Notre Dame to have their best win in 30 years. You had College Game Day there. You had Lou Holtz picking his 401st game. You had the green jerseys making a comeback. You had Sam Hartman, who's top five quarterback in America. You had what I thought was an extremely well played defensive game and a good comeback. I mean, Ohio State got up on them 10-0, and Sam Hartman led two really decisive drives with just excellent touchdown passes, especially that second one, which, I mean, he threw it so hard it basically knocked the receiver down on the back of the end zone. But it was almost like he threw it so hard that it kept the receiver in bounds. It was kind of a cool throw. Um, Only to have Ohio State score a touchdown on the last play of the game from the 1 yard line, running it in, when after a timeout, Notre Dame had 10 men on the field. I mean, how embarrassing and upsetting is that?
Yeah, and sometimes in those situations, I sometimes question calling a timeout because it allows the other team to kind of regroup a little bit, and then also you have the possibility for somebody to make a mistake on the substitution. And so, still, inexcusable. But I have seen, I feel like, situations where that has backfired on a defense more than it's helped them. But like we were talking about before the show earlier, it definitely felt like the type of colossal defeat if you're Notre Dame that may unfortunately define the season.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I'd go back to I believe it was 2nd and 25 or 2nd and 15. And this is the last time Notre Dame had the ball. It was about a minute and a half left, and Ohio State had one timeout. And Notre Dame threw the ball on second down, and then 3rd and 15 comes up, and instead of throwing the ball to get a first down and win the game, because one first down wins you the football game, they run the ball. And in my mind, I would get it if you switched it to where you wanted Ohio State to use one more timeout. But why on earth, when you have Sam Hartman, who's just, he's a veteran, he's the Viking god, he's someone out there that really just gives Notre Dame a quarterback they frankly haven't had since Joe Montana. Why do you take the game out of his hands when all he has to do is complete one pass and you beat Ohio State?
Yeah, I noticed that because the part of the game that I watched the most was like later in the fourth quarter, second half. And I felt like even though you have, some touchdown passes for Hartman, I felt like there were a lot of situations where they kind of ran the football more, where I didn't really see them open the offense up. And it kind of puzzled me. It was like Notre Dame was kind of calling plays based on how the game was being more defensive minded and not kind of going, for the big play. And I feel like that's always a mistake when teams take that kind of ultra conservative approach and don't just kind of go for the win.
Joe, I 100% agree with that. And even more so when you think about what Ohio State is, the athletes they have, the receiving core with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Obikwe. And they have better athletes than you. Your defenses play great, but the bottom line is you give the ball to Ohio State with a minute and a half left, they're probably going to score a touchdown. And you need to win the game. You need to play not to lose it and not do that. And that's what he did. He played not to lose the game. And, my wife and I were watching it, and she made I thought, a very astute point. Even when Notre Dame, when Ohio State was driving, there was a situation where I think it was the pass that got him down to the 1 yard line was on like a 3rd and 19 or something. Why not on that play just go ahead and send a jailhouse blitz? Maybe McCord hits a touchdown pass, but you know what? If you hit a touchdown pass right there, you're losing by 1 point, and you have a minute. I think you probably would still have 45 seconds to give it to Sam Hartman to get a field goal. And instead, you play this prevent defense. They complete it down to the 1 yard line, and they run 2 plays, and any chance you have of getting any kind of answer to win the game.
No, that's a good point. And really, if you're going to give up a catch at the 1 yard line, you just as soon as the guys score, that's almost worse, than a touchdown to give it up at the 1.
They almost should have had the foresight. And you'll see this in NFL games sometimes where the defensive players will throw the offensive player in the end zone. When he caught it there and they saw he went down with it, they needed to go ahead and just put him in the end zone.
Yes, exactly.
And so all these things, I think Freeman's doing a great job of recruiting. He's obviously someone that people really like, but he's got some growing pains when it comes to in-game calling. And you come out of that timeout, you have 10 players on the field on both plays. Those are kind of younger coach mistakes. On the flip side, I don't like what Ryan Day, how he called out Lou Holtz after the game. That was a little ridiculous. But I thought his coaching at the end of that game was excellent, especially when you get to the last 2 plays where he realizes that he has no timeouts. He's got a first down, and he's got 12 seconds. Throw the ball in the first play, and then on the second play, it doesn't matter anymore. It's probably the last play of the game. Run it, because you can run it up the middle, and you're only 1 yard out. You score a touchdown. There's no time left. And I thought that Ryan Day's play calling was superb at the end of that game.
Yeah, I think that they had the right scheme there. And I think that while Ryan Day's had, some losses to Michigan the last 2 years, that's kind of, allowed, I think, some criticism to surface in Columbus about, whether he has what it takes to compete for national championships at Ohio State. And within that rivalry, he's still, I think, a very premier play caller offensively. And I think that we saw that on display Saturday night.
Absolutely. And if you want to talk about getting real confidence from the last second drive, Kyle McCord was it the Hallows of all football, one of the most hallowed grounds there is, had his back against the wall and drove his team 90 yards in a minute and 15 seconds to get a touchdown. I mean, he's got no worries about him being supplanted as the starting quarterback again this season. And you know how talented he is. He's a 5-star with all the players that he has. That guy's got to have so much confidence right now moving forward, and it's going to pay a lot of dividends.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that this was, to me, kind of like bonus points for Ohio State to win a game like this. They've got the talent, they've got the athleticism, but they were coming into the season with an inexperienced quarterback. This would have been a very understandable loss. And so for them to win this game, I thought it was gravy.
Absolutely. Joe, another game that really came down to it. I mean, these games, I think, were side to side as the best games of the weekend and maybe the best games of the year so far in college football was Clemson and Florida State. I mean, Clemson really did come out and played a great game against Florida State. Their defense played really good against Jordan Travis for long periods of this game. And what's interesting is the Florida State team showed how well-rounded they are and how complete they are by flipping the game on its head with a strip sack for a touchdown return. I mean, that was what tied the game up right there, and that's what ultimately got it into overtime. And then you go into overtime, and, Florida State's got all the momentum, but the way they won with what I thought was maybe the best, at least in college, best pass-catch combo I've ever seen on a fade route to the end zone from Jordan Travis to Keon Coleman. I mean, that's a Heisman play right there.
Yeah, I mean, Coleman is just the real deal. I remember, throughout the summer, he was kind of like the last receiver to go in the transfer portal. A lot of people wanted him, of course, including Ole Miss that we've talked about. And that was just a huge pickup, kind of underrated a little bit at the time, I think, for Florida State. And it's just paid dividends for them. And it just shows you, you got to have players like that in order to win a big game on the road. And, of course, I think that's Florida State's first win against Clemson since 2014.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the last time they won was when they had J-Boo as their starting quarterback, and they made the college football playoff. So, I mean, that was an excellent win. I thought that the way that Florida State won it made it even more impressive that it's not like Clemson, gave up on their season and bent over, and you had a wounded Clemson. You had a Clemson that came out at home and played with a lot of pride. You took their best shot, and you made the plays that matter and won. And I think that pays a lot more for Florida State than it would have been had they gone in and beat them 41-7 or something.
I think so. I think Florida State, is positioned very well. Clemson, the question is, where do they go from here? They could go into a tailspin because I still think this is a very talented Clemson team that we've seen on display. I think when you look, at the fact they've lost 2 games, but look who they've lost to, 2 of the best teams in the ACC, really probably 2 of the best teams in the country. But the question for them is their level of expectation as a program has been so vast the last decade plus, where if they're basically out of the national championship conversation, are their players really going to care from this point forward? So I think that's where you have the danger that they could end up with several losses.
No, absolutely, Joe. I mean, it's going to be something. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the next segment when we talk about next week's games. But they got a rough slate ahead of them, and this could be the worst season that Dabo's had since, maybe his first 2 or 3 seasons he was there.
Right. That's true.
Joe, speaking of worst games and something that could cause a program to go into a tailspin, we got to switch to what happened with Ole Miss and Alabama. Ole Miss has never, in the time that Lane Kiffin's there, played a weaker Alabama team, one that was more teed up to be defeated. You had the chance to really put a huge hole in the Saban dynasty moving forward. I thought, frankly, you had the better team on paper, at least when it came to offensive side of the ball. You had a huge advantage at quarterback. I thought you had an advantage at wide receiver, big advantage at running back. You had a solid defense. And, Joe, I mean, the offense completely floundered in the second half. They had a lot of opportunities in the first half they couldn't take advantage of. And I really question the play calling, especially when it comes to handing it off to Judkins on outside runs. Because, Joe, I saw them hand it off to Judkins 3 times on outside runs, and every time he got more than 15 yards. But then we did it 3 times the entire game.
Yeah, there was a lot of concerns, Dan, with Ole Miss's approach to the game, specifically offensively, because the defense played, more than better to win. I mean,
I
their
thought that was a
first
B
half.
plus performance by the defense.
I mean, to me, their first half was like kind of on the level of that 2014 defense, with Perkins. Like it just kind of got, over their heads a little bit in the second half, and Alabama made some adjustments, and they took advantage of Ole Miss's deficiencies. But Ole Miss had the game, I think, right there on a tee for them to take it in the first half. They should have been up, I think, by 2 or 3 scores the way it was playing out, and they didn't create that separation. They couldn't even get that field goal at the end of the first half, let Alabama stay in the game when they really shouldn't have been, and then we saw what happened. And I think that I heard somebody talking about it on another podcast. You look at Kiffin's preparation for the game offensively, the script that Kiffin had for this game, to me, really lacked the A-plus script that we've grown accustomed to seeing from him offensively. Like he came out, and when they attacked Alabama's defense, like from the start, it seemed like things just were not flowing offensively. They just didn't have a good plan to me. I still don't know what's going on with the running game. Something just does not look right to me. I don't know if it's Nick Broker's departure on the offensive line. I don't know if Judkins is just not the same. Something is wrong on that side of the ball. And then with the receivers, I don't understand why some of these young receivers like Aiden Williams are not playing, or Braylon Brown, because to me, they just have no deep threat from the receiver position.
Yeah, there isn't that burner that you're used to having. There isn't, the Jonathan Mingo that can take it 80 yards like what you're used to seeing with an Ole Miss receiving core. And just there's not a lot of guys that really strike fear in you. And even the tight end position, which was something we were supposed to be so strong at, Michael Trigg is now off the team. The guy from Memphis, Praisecorn, hasn't played at all this year. And I think that's been maybe one of the more disappointing units on the team.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very frustrating. You expect a lot of production from those guys, and you just don't see it. And I'm just very concerned. I think that just what I saw from the offense. You had some moments from Dart, but I just didn't really.
No, I mean,
the rest of the season, where back to your original point, if you can't beat this Alabama team this year, like I think that it's a very legitimate cause for concern for the Kiffin tenure.
I think it is too, Joe, because you don't know that he's going to get to play Nick Saban again. He's not going to play him next year, so it's at least 2 years before he's going to get a chance to play Nick Saban again. I'm not saying Saban's going to retire in 2 years, but I would say it's a coin flip as to whether Saban makes it more than 2 years from now on.
Yeah, I feel like there's a good chance he may retire after next season. And, we, of course, have penciled, the 2024 season, for Ole Miss as a prime opportunity. But again, if they can't capitalize this past Saturday, I just don't know if it's going to happen. And then, now they're really about to enter the grind of the schedule where, similar to Clemson, it could really get out of hand from here.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely scary coming up. One thing I do want to mention, I don't think that it had an effect really on the outcome of the game, but I have been disgusted 2 years in a row with the officials not protecting Jackson Dart in this game. Last year, you had the plays where he was getting his head slammed into the ground by Alabama with no penalties. And this year, there were multiple shots to his head and no targetings, and including one on that first drive where he got targeted, had his helmet knocked off, and another guy face masked him at the same time, and there was still no call. I mean, what's up with that?
Yeah, I don't understand that at all, Dan. That's just ultimately inexcusable, and I have no idea, what the officials were looking at or not looking at.
And I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it was like only on Ole Miss. There was a time when the officials took away a down from Alabama in that game. I mean, I think this was just a poor officiating crew in general.
It was a weird game, like the whole way it played out. It was just so weird because the first half was like that 7-6. You don't expect a game in this day and age between these two teams. With Kiffin supposedly such an offensive genius, you just don't expect a game to play out that way. So I thought the whole thing was kind of bizarre, and I felt like Ole Ole Miss just missed out on a prime opportunity. And at the same time, though, I'm kind of curious to see where Alabama goes from here, because I feel like they suddenly have a little bit of momentum.
Yeah, I thought Alabama's defense was excellent in that game. You finally started seeing Dallas Turner and Tim Smith get some really good pressure on the quarterback. I thought that in the secondary, Alabama played a lot better than they had early in the season, especially against Texas. Terry and Arnold was a real star for Alabama at the DB position, made some real big plays, including the really ill-advised interception that Jackson Dart threw into double coverage. But Arnold was a beast in that game, and I thought you really saw Kevin Steele's defense. No matter what Lane Kiffin says, that was obviously a Kevin Steele defense. You could see the way the corners were playing aggressively, the blitz packages. I had Kevin Steele as our coordinator, our defense coordinator at Auburn for a long time. You could see the trademarks. I think he's an excellent defensive coordinator, and you definitely saw what he did in that game. And I'm sure he had a little extra motivation to stick it to Lane after what he said.
And I heard one person say this, I'd almost be curious to see if like that whole USF game, if that was all just like some type of little conspiracy from Alabama, to make it look like certain things were happening, to kind of throw Kiffin off a little bit. Like, I can't help but think that, you're never going to beat Nick Saban in his own game.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that Saban probably was definitely holding a lot back. I don't think he minded throwing Kiffin off about maybe creating a quarterback controversy that maybe didn't exist. I thought Miller played about a B minus game. That touchdown pass that he made when he got absolutely drilled in the ribs was a great, 50-yard TD pass right on the money. He threw one really poor interception into triple coverage that he telegraphed. But I really thought for the most part, he played a pretty consistent game and put him in a position where they could win.
He did. He did. And, I think Ole Miss also allowed him to be way too efficient. I think he finished 17 for 21. You just can't allow that.
No, exactly. I mean, he had very high completion percentage in that game. And like I said, I think that, there's definitely no issues with Milroe moving forward. Joe, the most impressive team of the weekend by leaps and bounds was Oregon. I mean, they decided that everyone else is like, oh no, Coach Prime, he's taking it personal. Oregon decided we're not going to just take it personal. We're going to just stick it to you with everything we have. We're going to have a pregame speech by Dan Lanning where he says that they're looking for clicks. We're looking for wins. You have the Oregon Duck come out. He's dressed up like Coach Prime with a cowboy hat and the chain. And, they did everything just to go ahead and make fun of Colorado to win this game. But unlike Colorado State and Matt Rule in Nebraska, they answered the bell and they let their play talk for them. And, I mean, that wasn't an absolutely dominating first half. Their defense really showed that Dan Lanning has brought what he did at Alabama and Georgia to the Pac-12 for now. And Bo Nix, I mean, I think he completed his first 12 passes. He's a legitimate Heisman contender this year, and Oregon looks like a complete football team right now.
Yeah, I mean, they look like, a lot of people are going to start kind of changing their picks, maybe as them as the team to beat this year. I mean, to me, they look that good on both sides of the football. And I really felt like Oregon had a good chance to go out there and have a strong showing and dominate Colorado, but it was even more impressive than expected. Like maybe one of the just best start to finish games you can imagine. And I really feel like, with what we've seen from Bo Nix, and we've talked all about the strength of the quarterback position for the Pac-12, I've kind of come away after this weekend feeling like, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of a three-person race for the Heisman. I feel like it's Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., and Caleb Williams. I think those are my top three right now.
I think them, and you throw Jordan Travis in the race. I think those are kind of the four guys that are in on it. But three of them are in the Pac-12 right now. And speaking of Michael Penix, they looked really good against California. And I feel like they're kind of doing themselves a disservice. Washington needs to work on their schedule a little bit because I'm never able to watch Washington because they're always playing so late at night.
Yeah, that'd be the one thing that might hurt Penix Jr. For Heisman candidacy. But yeah, I mean they look very strong. I told you that the Apple Cup this year, I think, may be about as good as it gets. And we've had, some great showings with Chris Peterson and Mike Leach in recent years.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Apple Cup, Oregon and Washington, Utah, whenever they play Washington and Oregon, those are going to be great games. I thought Utah's performance to come out and win another game yet again without Cam Rising, and then to beat UCLA 14-7, a team that is always so proficient on offense with Chip Kelly. That was a really impressive win to me, to win 14-7 against UCLA without your starting quarterback and shutting down, they're really a star-studded freshman quarterback.
Yeah, that was very impressive. As impressive as the defensive performance that Kyle Whittingham, said he's had in his tenure at Utah. Of course, they've got a short week now, and then they'll have to go to, I think, Corvallis on Friday night.
That's right, Joe. And speaking of Oregon State, with us talking about more Pac-12 football than you and I have maybe ever talked before, Oregon State and Washington State, the Pac-2 championship ended up being a classic, and the team that we ended up picking, Oregon State, ended up not getting it done. Washington State and Cam Ward had an excellent game, and Cam Ward's just sitting there holding up his hand saying, "Hey, guys, have you forgotten about me? I'm also quite a good quarterback."
I know I keep thinking about him because Ole Miss, was in on him when he was transferring to Washington State, and so every time he looks good, I keep thinking about that. But yeah, he's performed very well, and Washington State has really kind of quietly impressed me this season.
That's right, Joe. We've been talking about great quarterback play in the Pac-12. We got to bring this thing down a notch and talk about truly pathetic, eye-gougingly bad quarterback play. And that's what we saw from the Auburn Tigers on Saturday. They went to College Station, and the defense showed up. The defense took over the bus. They took over the field. They played excellent. The offense stayed at home, particularly all three of the quarterbacks. And Hugh Freeze, I thought his play calling did nothing to give any real chance to his quarterbacks to succeed. And he's very blunt about the talent gap that Auburn has, and I agree. They are. Harsin left the cupboards pretty bare, but that doesn't excuse to me the fact that Hugh Freeze had all season to go out and get a transfer quarterback, and he was getting so many players in the transfer portal, and then he ultimately went out and got Payton Thorne, which seems to be the worst transfer quarterback in America.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it too, Dan. And it's such the antithesis to, his previous stops. You look at him bringing in guys like Malik Willis to Liberty. Look at him getting Bo Wallace his first year at Ole Miss, getting the junior college championship game MVP to Oxford. It was a 7-6 season the first year, but you saw from day one that they had signs, of excitement from their offense. And I thought you were going to see a semblance of that this year at Auburn. And so for that not to happen to me is just utterly surprising.
Yeah, and what blew my mind is just how great the defense played yet again, and until they got worn down in the fourth quarter, and Texas A&M put up some trash touchdowns to extend the lead out. But Joe, there was a period of time in that game, and I tweeted about it, that Payton Thorne had been sacked 5 times and completed 5 passes. You cannot be a college football starting quarterback and have numbers like that.
Yeah, I just don't understand it. It's really shocking to me how they're performing. But I guess the good news is, you'll have a prime opportunity for some transfers in the offseason.
Oh, definitely. I know that Auburn does have a 5-star quarterback in Walker White coming out of Little Rock there that, right now, I don't see how it's even possible that he's not the starting quarterback based on what we have. But they're going to have to do something this offseason. And, I said it a bunch before the season started that I thought that he should make Robbie Ashford the starting quarterback. Even though he has limitations with his accuracy, he throws a good deep ball just like Jalen Milroe does. And he has the same running ability that Milroe does, maybe even better. And if you have a deficient offensive line, which we knew we had, even with bringing in all the transfers, why wouldn't you want the guy who's mobile that at least gives you a chance to make plays when things break down?
Yeah, that would have been better and also more representative of the type of offenses that Freeze has always run.
Exactly. I do have to give a shout out for what I thought was one of the funniest plays I've ever seen. Auburn's lone touchdown was scored by the African god Eugene Asante, the linebacker for Auburn. And I call him the African god because he actually is, I'm going to say African royalty. He is descended from Ashanti royalty in Africa. And he is the only real player in Auburn right now who seems to be an actual star. And I mean, he had an incredible, fumble return for a touchdown, but he had to dodge Jimbo Fisher, who was about 5 yards out in the field, to get the touchdown. And I'm sure everybody, Auburn fans and maybe some Texas A&M fans, were hoping Santi would have just bumped into him and taken him down when he got that touchdown.
Yeah, probably so. Probably so.
Um, but moving forward, I didn't think that Auburn would win that game against A&M, but I did think that the offense would have a pulse. And I'm still concerned about, we were talking about Ole Miss not getting the ball to Judkins. I'm not really sure what's going on with Auburn and Jarquez Hunter. They're not really feeding the rock to Hunter the way that I thought they should.
Yeah, that is an odd, it's odd the way it's playing out. You expected him to have a big season.
Absolutely. And Joe, to close it out on some big SEC games, another great game, which normally would have been the best game of the day, was LSU and Arkansas. At Death Valley, Arkansas pushed LSU to the core, and LSU had to make a last-second field goal to win the game. And it just goes to show you, I mean, I didn't make any kind of wagers on this game because Arkansas always plays LSU tough. But LSU looks so good that I think we just all need to accept that this is always going to be a hotly contested game, and Arkansas always comes to play when they come against LSU.
They really do. And it often seems like when it's in Baton Rouge, even when they play it close, it seems like LSU always finds a way. I've seen it time and time again. And they should have this year. That they're clearly the better team. Arkansas just played them very well. Pittman did a great job of getting the team, kind of back together after that BYU loss, the way that played out. But just kind of the takeaway for me was, just still impressed with Jaden Daniels. I think, he gives LSU a great chance to win the SEC West this year. But just kind of how much this game was an afterthought coming into the weekend is just still shocking to me. I told you in a text, I can't remember a year where LSU Arkansas was just almost a forgotten game.
It was, and I mean, it came for a truly unforgettable finish too. So just add another one in what I think is one of the more underrated rivalries in the SEC and LSU and Arkansas.
Oh yeah, it's always fun. I always loved it when it was the Friday after Thanksgiving.
I liked it too. It was better back then. The last one I'll talk about in the SEC, I thought South Carolina got a huge home win over a reeling Mississippi State. I know this is not the best Mississippi State team, but South Carolina has had such an interesting season with, leading off, getting beat really badly by North Carolina, frankly embarrassed by them, and then having a little bit of an uptick. They played Georgia really closer than anybody's really played them in 2 years. And then for them to get that big home win against Mississippi State, I think that's a real program-moving win for South Carolina, and I think that's something they should be excited about.
Yeah, it kind of allows them maybe to have, a chance to kind of get this season going in a positive direction.
That's right. And if you want to get yourself going and get excited about this football weekend, subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Dan and Joe Sports Show YouTube channel. See us in live and in color. Listen to all of our episodes on Spotify. Look up the Dan and Joe Sports Show on Spotify. And, of course, follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.